Hello, my name is Carl Surrey and this is a video tutorial for the Facebook group called Fans of Serif Software. Now, the other day I was looking around at Photoshop tutorials and I found one that was showing you how to put a flag image onto someone's face, much like what you can see here on screen, which is what I googled just to demonstrate what I was talking about. Now I found 2 or 3 tutorials and I did try to copy it as best I could for PhotoPlus, and I ran into quite a few problems, mainly because these tutorials, they use a Photoshop thing where you make a layer into a smart object, and that is something I've not been able to sort of reproduce in PhotoPlus. And they also use Displace Map, which is mainly what this tutorial is leading up to. It is to show you the Displace Map as used in PhotoPlus, which is, I don't think, quite the same as in Photoshop, but it is working in a sort of similar way. Now, I had trouble reproducing like these images here, putting like the whole flag just on the face. Let me just show you what I have come up with, and this is, I've managed to do this, and it is a sort of an amalgamation of various Photoshop tutorials, and it's the best I can do. You may be able to elaborate on this a bit more if your knowledge of the use of PhotoPlus is better than mine. Let me just quickly go back to this internet Google image page. There are a few things I just want to point out. If you do want to go for this sort of image and you manage to do better than I have done, you'll notice that in nearly all of these, well, in all of these images, the eyes have been taken out of the flag, which is what I'm going to do on my one. And also, like, if I just bring this down a bit, people's teeth have also not been included, because obviously if you were painting your face you wouldn't paint over your eyes or your teeth. But in some, the lips have been taken off, and in others the lips have been gone over with the image. That is a personal choice as to whether you go with taking the lips out of the flag image or not. But like I said, that is a personal choice, and I'm just showing you that you can do it with or without the lips being gone over. Right, so let's go back to this image here. As you can see, in this particular case, I did the eyes out, but I left the lips still part of the flag image. So let me just come over to here with my 2 images. Now, both of these images, the one of the gentleman and of the Union Jack flag, I've got from a free image website called pixabay.com. Now, obviously you can use your own, or if you have similar images, or look at Pixabay and get different images, that is quite up to you. Now, let me just also go back to this internet page. Another thing that I have picked up from the Photoshop tutorials that I looked at, and as you can see from these samples, the best type of image to do this on is if someone is looking at the camera face on as much as possible. And also I would imagine it's much easier if, like in this image of this woman's hair, her hair is like really pulled back, there's no stray hairs in the way, whereas if I can find one down here, but I can't find one that well. So maybe this young girl here, I mean, there might be a few flyaway hairs that are getting in the way, and it will make the cutting out and selection process much harder. So I would imagine images of men are probably easier to do, especially if they have less hair. or if you have an image of a woman with long hair, so you really want, it would make the selection process far easier if the hair isn't going across the face and what have you. So let's go back to this image here, and we will start this tutorial properly. So you need to open up your image of a flag or an emblem, be it your favorite sports team or whatever that you want to use as your background and as the image on the person's face. So then you also then want to get your portrait image, and before I'll go ahead with this one, I just want to boost the colors on this particular image because he is a little bit pasty, no disrespect to the model or the person who took the picture, but this is just my personal preference and you don't need to do this. But I'm just going to boost the saturation slightly just to put a little bit more colour back into his cheeks. I'll leave it about there. So assuming this was the start image, what you do is come to select all, go to the edit menu and copy, and then go to your background image, go to the edit menu and then paste as a new layer or Control L. I'll just increase that size slightly, there we go. So as you can see down here in the layers display area, we have the background and layer 1, which is the image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the size of this image so it fits onto the flag, and to do that I'm going to use a deform tool, and then I'm going to hold down the Alt key and come to one of the corners, drag it down to the bottom corner down here, and then the image will now be pretty much the same size as the flag. I'll just click on a different tool to remove the deform tool outline. So that is that part complete. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the Smart Selection Brush tool, and I'm going to be selecting this gentleman's face and his body. Now I have the grow tolerance set lowish on about 11. I am going to reduce the border size to 1, so hopefully not get too much of the background here. You are probably best to start with an image you probably already cut out and has no background, but I'm a bit too lazy to do that. I'm just going to do this quickly. So this whole tutorial is being done quickly, and obviously if you're taking your time you will end up with a much better finished result. But as you can see, it's, if I just click around the image and then get the whole of this gentleman's face and body, and that I believe is pretty much everything. There's a few loose hairs. If I zoom in right up close to this hair up here, there's a few loose hairs outside the image which I haven't included in this selection, but I'm not going to overly worry too much about that. Now you can, if you do go over slightly a bit too much, which I don't think I have greatly, there's probably a little bit up here. What I'll do is you can click on 2 boxes here, which is add to selection, and this one's subtract to selection, and I'm going to reduce the brush size quite small, and there's just a few areas up here which I'm going to select or deselect certain areas from I'm not going to worry about a few stray hairs that haven't been included, and so hopefully I haven't got so much of a very close edge to this, and I've got some of the back. I don't have any of the background showing, so I won't have a rough edge. Right, so that is my selection made. Now, this is something that you can do or not, it's up to you, but I'm just going to refine the edge slightly. You have got this refined border up here, and I've read the help files on this section, and to be honest, I don't fully understand what they're talking about with these three different options for the borders. So what I do is I come down to the polygon selection tool, and the selection area is still selected, and then I just click on modify selection, which opens up this box here, and then I just feather it by 1 or 2 pixels, and then click OK, and then hopefully that will just sort of help blur the edges. But that is just something I personally do, it's not something you have to do yourself. So now what I need to do is add a layer mask, and because of this selection it will hide the background, and the layer mask icon is down here along the bottom in the layers display area, and it's the one that looks like a shield, a white shield on a grey background. You click on that and the layer mask is added next to the icon, the image of that layer. So as you can see, it has masked off the background that was outside the selected area, so that the background flag is now visible. Now what I'm also going to do is to add a very slight blur. Well, first of all, let me get rid of the selection area. You can press Control and D, and then the selection area will disappear. And I'm just going to add a very slight Gaussian blur. You come down to, from Effects, down to Blur, Gaussian blur, and it's only 0.5 of a pixel. And again, it's just to hopefully lose some of that dark and rough edges from my very quick cutting out of that gentleman's image from the background. So now what I want to do is to, if I turn off this bottom layer by just clicking on the little square next to the icon, and as you can see, that gentleman is now cut out. Let me just come back up slightly here. Now this layer here, I'm going to right click that. Let me right click over here so hopefully the menu comes on screen better. Yeah, that's it. Right click that and come up to duplicate, and then just click OK. So now I have two versions of that layer, and let me just shut that up slightly. Yeah, I have two versions of that layer and the layer mask. Now this second layer that I have just made, this is what we are going to make the Displace Map with. And to do that, well, I'm going to make this layer black and white. So I'm going to come up to Image, Adjust, Black and White. And then when you have the black and white options here, I'm just going to click OK. And then that will turn that image black and white. Now, in all the Photoshop tutorials I saw about doing this sort of thing, and they're using the Displace Map, they all turned their images black and white because Photoshop, it uses really only the blackest areas and the whitest areas to do the displacements, and the greys it pretty much ignores. I read quickly through the Photoshop help files, and it says it uses the green and red channels. So I'm guessing it does work slightly differently to how Photoshop does it, but I've followed the Photoshop tutorial and made it black and white, and it does seem to work okay, so that is how I'm going to stay, using the black and white. So what we need to do is to make this even more contrasty, i.e. there's more blacks and there's more whites for the tool to work with. So I'm going to come up again to Image, Adjust, and down to Levels, and then that brings us up the Levels tool. As you notice, I'm not using these as layers but as tools in their own right, because I only want to work on this one layer. So what I'm going to do is the 3 arrows underneath the histogram here, I'm going to bring them in, and what I'm trying to do is get a pretty good image that's got a lot of dark areas and quite light areas, but not with too much grey. Now this can be pretty hit and miss. I've practiced this probably 2 or 3 times, and I'm guessing each time has been very different. So let me just had to have a, so I've got a lot of nice bright areas, but also some nice really dark areas for the Displace Map to find. So I will just click OK on that, and what I will do now is I will hide this image layer underneath. Not that it's totally necessary, but I'm just doing it as a precaution. And what I'm going to do is I'm now going to save this layer and only this layer's image, and to do that I'm going to use the export option and just click export as a JPEG, and then click export, and you won't necessarily be able to see all this, but I'm going to just call this Displace Map Test. Okay, so I've now saved that on my computer, so I can now reactivate both these bottom layers, and then this layer that we have currently highlighted, you have 2 options here. You can totally delete it because we don't need it anymore, or you could just hide it. So we go back to the color version. I can't be bothered to delete it, because when we finish this and you flatten the image, that will be discarded anyway, so I just turn it off and forget about it. Right, so moving on to the next step, what we need to do is to make a copy of the bottom layer, which is the flag in my case, or in your case it may be a sports emblem. Just click and highlight on that, right click and duplicate this, and what I'm going to do now, as you can see I've got 2 versions of the flag. I'm going to click on this layer and hold down the button and move the whole layer right to the top. So now we have a version of the flag at the very top and the version of the flag at the very bottom. Now what we need on here is a layer mask like we have on this image here. And now to get that, if I click on the layer mask here, you will get a little white line around the outside of it, and if I click on the icon next to it, the little white line goes around the outside of the icon, which basically means whichever one has got the white line around the outside, that is what you're working on, be it the image itself or on the layer mask. So what you need to do is you need to press and hold down the control key and click on the layer mask, and this will bring back the selection area that we made earlier. So I can now come back to the top layer, just click on that to highlight it and add layer mask, and it will add the layer mask exactly as it was from the layer below. Now you can't see the image here at the moment because what we need to do is change the blending mode. So I'm going to change the blending mode to multiply. Now you have various options. I mean, some of these work better than others. If I remember rightly, overlay can work depending on what you're really after, but I'm going to stick with multiply. Let me get back to it there. I can now press Ctrl and D to remove the selection area. Hang on. Let me just change that. That's it, remove the selection area by pressing Ctrl and D. And I'm going to just lower the opacity of this flag that's over the man's face, so more of his face comes through, probably around the 50% mark. There we go. Right, now this hasn't quite worked the way I wanted it to because it's not as bright. Oh, I know why. Because I've somehow accidentally turned back on this black and white layer. Let me hide that, that's better. Which is probably why I should have deleted it. I'll rectify that now by just deleting it. I'll highlight it, right click, delete. And that deleted the layer mask. Now I just need to right click and delete the image as well. As you can see, I've not practiced this as much as I should have done. Right, so now with that deleted, I'll re-highlight the top layer, and again I will just increase or decrease the opacity of the flag on this man's face. I still think the 50% area is quite strong enough. Yes, that's not too bad. Right, so what I'm going to do now is change tools to the brush tool, which is here, paintbrush tool, and I'm going to make sure that black is the foreground color. If yours isn't, you can swap it with these little arrows at the top here, or if you haven't got black and white at all, you can click on this reset colors and it will make these two black and white. You just need to make sure that black is the foreground color. This is because we're going to be working on the layer mask, so click on the layer mask, so you've got the little white line around the outside. So this means we are now going to be painting black onto the layer mask or onto the white areas, and any black on that white area will show what is underneath. So this is where we're going to bring out the eyes. So it's best if you zoom in as close as you can. And where's my opacity? My opacity is quite low, so I'll bring this up to 100%. And that's not working. Oh, somehow when I zoomed in, I don't know how, but I changed this to white, so I'm painting white onto white, which is why it's not showing. Change this back to black. There we go, that's better. And again, when you're doing this, I'm sure you'll take much more care and time than I am. There we go. Not my finest hour. Right, as you can see, I've gone over a bit. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly swap this back to white and repaint over the areas where I came out just a tad too far. Change this back to black. Move over to the other eye. Now this is pretty much okay because it's in the white area of the flag, but I'm just going to quickly go over it just in case there's any residue from that flag image over the eye. And then I will zoom out. As you can see now, both his eyes stand out. I'm not sure. I think I'll leave the lips as they are, but what I will do is I'm going to remove the flag image from his shirt and lower neck area. I'll just get a bigger brush size. You don't have to worry about going over the edge here because we're only working on the layer mask. So now this time I will remove these odd bits that are on his lower neck because I found them to be distracting. So I will just leave that bit on his chin. I'll just zoom in a bit, reduce the brush size. That's enough. Zoom out again, and then just finish taking it off of. I'm going to do all of his lower neck. Take that away from the flag image. Nearly there. Sorry for the delay, I was concentrating. Right, like I said though, you'll obviously do this in a much better and neater way than I have. Oh, there's just a bit of his shirt around here. Now whether you include people's ears, and I'm not certain you would paint your ears if you were doing a sort of face painting, so I'll just come down here roughly. Right, so again I'm going to zoom in a bit here. And come up to the hair, because you wouldn't face paint your hair. Now a lot of this, again, I'm just going to paint black over this area. Now the difficult, obviously the top bit is not so difficult. It's when you get to the borderline between the skin and the hair, which is where you're going to have some sort of tricky areas and loose hairs. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the opacity down to around, let me see, let's try around the 30% mark. And I'm just going to do little individual clicks as I go around the edge and slowly build up an area between the hairline and the actual areas that are painted, or that I don't want painted. There's going to have to come a point where, unless you're really good at selection and you can be bothered to do hairs, or almost every individual hair that is there, that you need to sort of just say, oh, that is good enough, because it's not going to be seen that close to. I'm just going to go back to white, because there's a few areas up here that I just want to maybe bring back a bit of the flag a bit higher up. I probably took a bit too much off. Yeah, that will do. So if I zoom out, hopefully, let me just take that bit of colour off his ear down that side there. There you go. Right, so now we come to the point where we would use the Displace Map. I'm still slightly worried about this area here. Let me just maybe tone that back slightly. There we go. Because it's not, mine's not properly a full-on face image, I'm getting much more than neck here, so I'm not 100% certain quite where to draw the line. But I'll leave it at that. This is only a quick demonstration, so I will leave it at that point. Okay, moving on to the reason for this tutorial, which is using the Displace Map. Now, one of the most important things you need to do now is to make sure that the little white line around what is currently around the layer mask, because that is what we were working on, is actually on the icon for the image. So just click on the icon for the image, and the little white line around the outside will move from the layer mask to the image. I have done this myself by error, and you end up trying to displace the layer mask, which really just doesn't work. We need to be displacing the image. So make sure that you do click on the image icon, and then we come up to Effects, Distort, and Displace. Now, this has still got the image here from a previous attempt, but this will either be blank, this box up here, or it will have whichever image you may have used beforehand. So I'll just click inside that, and it opens up the patterns box, and there are quite a few categories here that are made by Serif, but I'm going to make my own category. So there's a little arrow, downward arrow here, and then add category, and then I'm just going to call this Displace Map. Click OK. So we're now in the Displace Map folder, but I have nothing in this yet, so I will right click in the blank area and then add item, and I'm going to add the item I saved earlier, and then that will be added into the Displace Map folder. So you just need to click on it and highlight it, click OK. It will then put the representation of that image in the pattern box. Now you've got various options here, like wraparound and repeat edge and tile, which you can, depending on what you're trying to do, you can try different things, but I'm going to leave it on wraparound and stretch to fit. And you can move the sliders however you want, and it will affect the image differently. Now the whole point of this Displace Map here is, what we're trying to achieve is showing how the painted image on the face isn't just flat on his face, because as I hope you can see here, it's like it's curving round his lip here, and sort of like going over the bumps and ridges of his forehead. I mean, this is quite excessive where I've moved it up to, so I'm going to just drop it down to around the 10 or 11 mark. There you go, just so there's some slight distortion, and I'm going to click OK. And if I zoom in, especially to his lip area, I hope you can see where it looks like it's painted, just curving down the top lip, curving around the top lip, bottom lip I should say, and going in and out of the forehead grooves. So it's just helping it look more natural and look as though it actually has been face painted onto his face. It's a very small tool and it does a very basic job, but hopefully it will make it look more realistic, as though it is actually curved and rounded onto the person's face. So almost at the end here, I'm just going to blur the background. So I'm going to come down to the background layer, click on it to highlight it, and then I'm going to come up to Effects, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I'm really going to go quite high with this, probably up the 20s or something like that, so you still know what it is behind. So just click OK, wait for it to do its thing. There we go. So there, that is pretty much my finished image. I've not been too precise with it, as you can tell by some of the edges around here, but hopefully you get the idea of where I was trying to get at. So using the Displace Map, I've managed to sort of hopefully make this image look as though this painting was done in real life and not a fake one. I hope you've learnt something here. This is probably a tool you will never use that much, but it is useful to know a little bit about it. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.